Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 27. Make sure you like and follow wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander. And 1 week after they made me hate Thanksgiving forever, I was back on the Cowboys, and they covered ugly, but they covered. Speaking of wins, have you checked out Cash Grab? Tons of chances for you to win there. Cash Grab is the DRF Sports all-new free-to-play sports prediction game where you can win real money. It's available to every sports fan in the App Store and Google Play Store. Win real cash prizes every day, as well as a chance to win big money jackpots. All you have to do is download the free DRF Cash Grab app, create an account, and start predicting. Who will win the first quarter? How many touchdowns will Tom Brady score? Answering questions like these can end in you making real money. So download the DRF Cash Grab app now and win big. And we've got a ton of picks for a massive week of football in both the NFL and NCAA. But hopefully you're still getting your betting info from us here on the podcast and from the DRF Sports Sunday Scoop e-newsletter. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up for free at drf.com/sports to receive 2 free weekly newsletters delivered to your email inbox every Friday and Sunday. Both are packed with powerful betting angles you don't want to miss. Again, that's drf.com/sports for all the insight and analysis you need each and every day. Plus, of course, we continue to go in depth on this podcast. On today's ep, we've got you covered betting-wise with our best bets in the NFL Week 13, plus a deep dive into Conference Championship weekend in the NCAA. We're just trying to hand out winners all over the place. And so, of course, my guy Matt Russell is here to help us out with the picks and more. And luckily for y'all, starts right about now. So about a week ago, we were here discussing the Dallas Cowboys, just ruining Thanksgiving, ruining a Thursday, and now fast forward, and we're back, and the Cowboys came through for us. Now, that was a weird-ass game, I'm not going to lie to you, on a lot of different levels, but the Cowboys end up covering at whatever the number was, and we had a little back and forth, and by we, for those listening to this on the audio form, I mean, my friend, Mr. Matt Russell, a little back and forth about the number because that number was moving. There was a lot of movement on that Dallas Cowboys line, but luckily wherever you were sitting on it, the Cowboys come through with a win and a cover. And how does it feel to be, back on the Cowboys train just 1 week later, my friend?
I still don't really care for it. I mean, great, we want to bet, but whatever, I guess. I was tweeting out last night, as you well know, right? I don't know if you've seen the HBO music documentaries that have come out recently, but there was one, I think it was the second one, if I'm not mistaken, Alanis Morissette. Very good documentary. You forget Jagged Little Pill was a banger from an album standpoint. Obviously the most famous song from that album, a little ditty called Ironic. And the irony was not lost on me last night that the Cowboys got every BS call, the absurd blocking call that happened that I think changed the game. Troy Aikman mentioned it. They mentioned it on the broadcast. I think they were pretty accurate about that. And you never know whether the Saints are going to go and do anything with that first down, but certainly being pinned deep with that Saints offense or lack thereof was problematic. And of course, Tony Pollard runs a long touchdown, which of course he does, right? Because a week after we talked about Ezekiel Elliott being washed, he thankfully just barely goes under his total yards because I had that prop yesterday. But he looks awful again, and Pollard looks amazing again. And the irony's not lost on me that a week after the Cowboys had a sweet turnover that involved a guy keeping 2 feet in bounds and keeping the ball in bounds that didn't count last week, that they got not the exact same play, obviously, but sort of fundamentally the same concept, that they would get that play to work. It is not lost on me that Greg Zuerlein is banging away on 50-yard field goals when he could not only hit a 50-plus yard field goal last week, he couldn't hit an extra point. So the irony, folks, is not lost on me. These things are far more ironic than anything that young Alanis was singing back in the mid-90s. So I ended up doing well in that game. And it's funny because we talked about it on Tuesday. I'm like, I don't really love this game, or I don't really, we need to know what's going on as far as, the injury stuff is concerned, right? And who's going to start at quarterback, but more importantly, in a lot of ways, is Kamara going to be around? What about the offensive tackles for the Saints, right? And so you tweeted out that you're like, all right, I'm getting back on the horse with the Cowboys. And I'm just like, maybe just wait a sec on the Cowboys, because the Saints are going to do the thing where they've been practicing all week with Taysom Hill. They probably have a handful of plays that they like, and those things are probably in the script to start the game. And so that game starts, it took a little bit to get going there, but that game starts 7-7. And, maybe that number didn't necessarily move a ton off of 6.5, but at least you've seen the Saints sort of shoot their bullets, if you will, right? And then, at that point, okay, the Cowboys have seen what the Saints have. There's probably not that much more in the way of tricks for the rest of the game, because they would try to use those early to take an early lead, which is the only way the Saints were going to win that game. And of course, that doesn't work out for them. Again, it's still a relatively close game where at one point you could get Cowboys -3.5 in the second half. And it kind of worked out exactly as we thought it might, where Taysom Hill then has to throw once the Cowboys get that lead. And again, they get that lead because of the Pollard touchdown and ostensibly because of that penalty that was called, right? And that's not just a 10-point lead against any old team. It's a 10-point lead against a team that can't really throw the football, which is always going to be problematic. And so whenever you bet that game live, whether it was in the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, even fourth quarter, right up until the point where the Cowboys get that pick six, which was incredible in its ridiculousness, as most things in the NFL are, all of those cash, right? All of those live numbers cash, whether it was -11, -3.5, everything, all of those live numbers cash. So that was fun. It's never going to make up for the previous week. Isn't it ironic?
So a few things here. One, that documentary is a great doc. Two, it made me realize that I know a lot more Alanis Morissette songs than I ever would have thought. I was here like, wait, I know the words. Like, why do I know the words to these songs? Yeah,
that's what I mean. It's like that Jagged Little Pill album's like, oh man, there were a lot of songs on that like I know of, and I never had the album. For sure, my sister did, but I was just like, yeah, I'm not looking to necessarily play some Alanis around the house, but like, I'm like, it was just song after song. I was like, I do know that song, because going in, I would have been like, I know 3 songs, right? And it's like, oh my God, do I know 10 Alanis Morissette songs? It would appear that I do. And that's probably too many, just in the same way that whatever carries Ezekiel Elliott got last night were also too many, especially in the fourth quarter. But don't get me restarted on that.
I see what you did there, and I like it. I approve of this message. But yeah, I was stunned at how many. I'm like, I feel like I was still listening to Biggie. Like, why do I know so many Alanis Morissette songs? And then you realize, like, oh, it's the way that culture was in terms of we listened to the radio, we watched. I mean, for us, Much Music, aka MTV. Sure. But just very different. But anyways, beyond that, the point that where I'm going with all of this is, you watched that game last night, and for me with the Cowboys, it took a couple series. It was exactly what you said. You watch it for a couple series, and I'm like, oh, this, like, the Saints can't continue this. Like, this is not going to go well for the Saints at all, because there's going to be a point where they have to like throw the ball and make plays. And the Cowboys, for as bad as their defense is, and Taysom Hill, they tried to throw at your man's, what's my guy's name? Brown, that had all the
Anthony Brown.
I was going to say Anthony Brown, but I wasn't confident in it at all. But I mean, much like I don't know how confident the Cowboys were in his efforts, but they did try to, Taysom Hill did try the Joe Flacco plays on Anthony Brown a couple times, and it didn't work. And you could just tell, like, this isn't going to go well. So I'm going to say here, Matt, that for the first time, I was quite undisciplined last night with my bets. Like, I was No. Like, I mean, it worked. Like they all cashed,
Right.
but I'm
Yeah.
just saying, like,
Right.
it was an emotional, like, you stupid Cowboys. I swear, if you guys don't come through, which is not what you should be doing, right?
You're right.
I'm saying this
Right.
as a lesson here, kids.
Yeah.
It worked last night, but I know better to not be
Right.
emotional with both that and just a throwaway to the Raptors. The Raptors was against the Bucks last night. Not sure if you
Right.
caught the drama there, but
I did
Giannis
not.
right before tip off is like, oh, I'm not going to play in this game. The line was Bucks -4.5. Giannis says he's not playing, immediately swings to Raptors -1.5.
Sure.
And I'm sitting there like, okay, if you guys can't beat the Bucks, who are on the second night of a
Right.
back-to-back, and you are at home chilling and waiting, then what are we even doing this year? So
Right.
I say all that to say, I'm glad that we are having this podcast right now because you can get me back disciplined in the lessons
Right.
that we've been working on and putting forth on this pod.
Well, it started on
a question. You got a question.
Well, I was just going to say, well, it started on Tuesday, right? Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, maybe I am, like you were thinking of betting the Saints just because you were still in your feelings about the Cowboys,
yeah.
right? And we talked
Yeah.
about it being like, okay, like
Yeah.
we have to step away from the fact that the
Mhm.
Cowboys are now officially our least favorite team. And listen, we always joke about people who think like I hate their team or whatever. It's like, no, I hate that your team doesn't cover if I expect them to cover. And if they covered all the time, like I would probably be more likely to bet them. Like I would have, I would have a better feeling about them or a larger level of respect for them, right? And so like, that being said, I have to now hate the Cowboys based on last Thursday as things have since shaken down. And so you were the same way and you're like, well, I got to, we have to bet the Saints here because I can't stand this Cowboys team or whatever. And I'm like, okay, but like, let's step back and like, let's make sure like the injuries and the right players are involved for us to like make a salient decision. And as long as like the number stays kind of anything around 6, anything under 7 with the appropriate injuries being in the mix, right? Whether it's Cowboys having guys, we were hoping, and again, like we were hoping Ezekiel Elliott wasn't going to play. And like when it was sort of like the McCarthy of the whole thing where it was like McCarthy's out, it's like still fine with betting the Cowboys. If Ezekiel Elliott had been announced out like right up until the start of that game, and maybe the line drops a point because fools are out there thinking that Ezekiel Elliott matters at this point, like how great would have that been? Like a full scale workload for Tony Pollard would have been outstanding. Like the Cowboys probably would have won that game in the first half if that were the case, instead of just running Zeke straight into the line for a handful of plays. So yeah, I mean, discipline comes in a variety of forms, right? A lot of it's emotional discipline. A lot of it's just sort of like math and accounting discipline when it comes to your bet sizing and that sort of thing, right? So there's a lot of different forms that it can take. But yeah, we'll get everybody back on the right track here. As you got away with one, if you will, last night, which happens thankfully from time to time.
We'll take it. Raptors and Cowboys hooking me up. And more importantly, though, Matt back to hook all of us up with some information and some education on where the line is, where it's going, and where it's coming from. Because that's what we try to do here on this pod, as we try to, hand you some best bets. I'll give out my best leans, like kind of what I'm thinking on these lines. And then Matt will tell me where I'm wrong or where I should switch or just, and last week was an interesting pod. Last week was an interesting Friday pod because I was just like, I don't have a good feel on anything. And I feel like we disagreed on every single pick
game,
for the most part. And so, but for me though, it was a good lesson in like, okay, well, there's just weeks where I don't think I have a good feel, and that's all right. And hey, week 13, maybe I'm feeling a little bit better. We'll see how things go. But as we get to some of the picks here, Matt,
let's go.
This is a game that I think is one of the biggest games of the week. And I was confused by this line, but let's go with it here. 6-5 Chargers are at the 7-4 Bengals favored by 3. And this line seems weird to me. So follow me here, right?
Yeah.
The Chargers haven't really looked that good in months, right? Last week, they lose to the Broncos. A lot of people not really feeling that. A lot of people were shocked by that. Not us.
Right. Not us.
Right? You coerced me. You talked me into the Broncos and my guy Teddy Two Gloves, which doesn't take much, but hey.
Right.
Meanwhile, the Bengals just smashed the Steelers. Public perception would tell me that this line should probably be higher. Not that I would bet on the Bengals, but maybe I was hoping to be able to get the Chargers at a higher number. Do you know what I mean? I was hoping that I could be getting the Chargers at maybe 4.5. Hey, maybe a 5, whatever.
Sure.
I'll settle for the 3.
Yeah.
But is this line as weird to you as it is to me? Or you're just like, no, this is just what we're doing here?
No, it's not weird to me because let's say it bluntly, like I understand how the NFL works. Like I understand how NFL betting works. And like, it's really actually not surprising. It is wrong. I'll tell you that, but it's wrong in the way that I think a lot of people aren't really aware of, right? It's wrong because this should be closer to a pick'em. Like this is a pick'em game. This is a pick'em game all day, every day, like maybe a point for the Bengals, but you're right about the recency bias, as we've coined that phrase, not here necessarily between the two of us, but like betting society over the last 5 to 10 years has created that phrase. So here, look at it this way, right? Like the Chargers play the Steelers, and they are on their way to blowing out the Steelers, right? Just absolutely like up and down the field on the Steelers. But there's a blocked punt. There's, a third down drop. There's a ball that goes off a guy's face mask up into the air and the Steelers intercept it. And all of a sudden that game becomes close in the end. But like metrically, and anybody who has eyeballs through 3 quarters just goes, yeah, the Chargers are just running the Steelers, up and down the field here. Like this can't be sustained, unless there's some sort of flukiness that happens here. All right. That was 2 weeks ago. Last week, the Steelers go to Cincinnati and they get blown out essentially again, or at least through 3 quarters. That's how it could have been. Now, again, touchdown here or there for the Bengals, and maybe that game is at least within striking distance where it's a 17-point fourth quarter Bengals lead in the same way that it was the Chargers who had a 17-point lead. Point is, from a metric standpoint, from a play-to-play standpoint, right, both teams were blowing out the Steelers. So then it really just comes down to the other game in the last 2, because prior to the Raiders game for Cincinnati, people weren't that psyched about the Bengals, right? They had gotten just blown out by your boy Baker Mayfield at home, right? Like this was not that long ago, but they go and they beat the Raiders, and frankly, didn't particularly look that great. That game was a close game up until late. Joe Burrow wasn't exactly slinging it around the yard against the Raiders. Like Joe Mixon was very good. Now, he's obviously the guy that a lot of people are keying on for this matchup. You mentioned the Chargers losing to the Broncos. Now, again, if we go really, really myopic and we just go, well, the Broncos lost to the Eagles, and like that's, some terrible loss. It's like, well, no, like the Eagles up and down team, like, listen, almost all of the teams in this league, right? There's a handful of really bad ones. There's like maybe one good one, and we're not even really sure if that's necessarily the case. And then everybody else is just wildly, wildly up and down. So the idea that we're just going to judge these 2 teams off of 2 games when nothing has happened structurally. This isn't like the Titans where it's like Derrick Henry's out, this team's big trouble. AJ Brown, Julio Jones, like they're without them, they're screwed. Like nothing's happened to the Chargers. Couple of injury things that have been an issue, right? Like missing a guard, missing some defensive backs, et cetera, right? But nothing drastic there. And nothing wild has happened for the Bengals in a positive way that all of a sudden for 2 games, they are some amazing team. Fundamentally, the market has been rating the Chargers ahead of the Bengals all season long. And if that's the case, even if that's the case by like a microscopic number, right? Even if you're factoring home field advantage at this point, especially for the Cincinnati Bengals, like it cannot be more than 1.5 points. And I would have this closer to 1 for the Bengals when it comes to home field advantage. So again, like my numbers come out to the Chargers actually being favored in this game by less than a point, admittedly. But the point is that this game is that coin flip type of game that we see all the time where we just go like, whether it's 2021 or any year previous, it's like, if it's a coin flip game and you are getting 3 points, take those points. But the reason that we are getting 3 points is that this game opened 2.5, and everybody who's all back on the Bengals bandwagon because we want the Bengals to be good, right? We did so. Andy Dalton made a career on everybody just wanting the little Bengals to be good for a change, right? To compete with the Steelers of the league, to compete for a playoff spot, et cetera, et cetera. And then we all just had to admit to ourselves that just Andy Dalton isn't that guy, right? He's not going to bring a moribund franchise. He might be able to guide them to a playoff spot, but it's not going to go well after that. And so we want that team like the Bengals to be, we want the Chargers to be good too. And then when we're disappointed by them, we get really angry about it, right? Like we get really disappointed. Now you see, and again, this is why I always advocate, like watch mainstream coverage of sports, not from an eye of like, let's listen to what these people have to say in a, you know, sort of verifying way. Let's do it in a like, oh my God, this is what generic fan guy, generics, and who has now become generic sports better in the world. Like this is what this person is thinking. And so this person is selling the Chargers in the same way that everybody in the talking head community is selling the Chargers. Well, that's where value is created, right? That's the value creation that we're looking for. And when we can see that with our plain eyes going like, okay, this game should be around to pick them based on how these teams have been rated all season long. And when nothing's changed, particularly like week 4 has to matter. Week 1 has to matter. Week 8 has to matter, not just weeks 10, 11, 12, and then of course 13. So this is a really easy bet for me to make. There is obviously, as we always say, there are no guarantees, but it's my favorite bet to make because you can just see everybody piling into the Bengals and how they may be disappointed come Sunday when a Chargers team that, again, is a 50-50 shot or maybe slightly better than a 50-50 shot to win this game. When they do, everybody throws their hands up in the air and go, can you believe it? Like this league, you never know, right? This is the biggest game of the week because a bit of a fork in the road for these teams too, right? Where they are both in competitive divisions where even the worst team in the division isn't that bad from a record standpoint. And, you know, are we battling for a division? Are we battling for a wild card? These two teams might end up in second place in their division, in which case this game, an AFC game, a head-to-head matchup is going to be really important here, right? So it's not like there's any sort of situation where it's like, well, maybe this team's under, you know, prepared or not, you know, ready to go and all of that sort of thing. And so I love this bet. This is Chargers +3 for me in every way I can possibly imagine, right? On the money line, it's in contests, all of that sort of thing. It's a perfect contest play because you know Cincinnati is going to be incredibly popular, you know, to be able to make a move on a large group of people in a contest, whether it's the big one in Las Vegas that I'm in or the one that you might be in at home. So yes, I think we see a lot better out of the Chargers this week, right? Always have faith in Justin Herbert. I think this game is going to be like Bengals, Packers, Bengals, Vikings, right? Like these close games that we've seen the Bengals play at home, even though we've also seen them blow out the Steelers and get blown out by the Browns, right? Like this is a very sort of even team. This is a team that should be 6-6 in the same way that right now the Chargers are fair value for about a 6-6 type of a record. That's the league that we're in. I am fine with that. And I like it because it means that on certain weeks we get +3 on two teams that are relatively equal. And that's the situation here with the Chargers.
And I like the fact that, you know, I talked about the reads and all that, and being on the Chargers for a reason that I thought something just seemed off, right? So like, I obviously didn't know what exactly that was, but the initial point of like, oh, okay, this is why I like the Chargers, because the fact is these two teams are pretty close, right?
Yeah.
And like that. So I'm just, do you know what I'm saying? Like my initial thing of, okay, something just seems weird to me, this line. So I would like to take the Chargers with more points, but I'll settle for taking them at 3 points because this still seems messed up, because I'm anticipating so many more people being on the Bengals that would move the line up. Like I was expecting it to be up even higher just because people are like Bengals, right?
You're right. And if you're an odds maker, you're doing the same thing, right? So you know, I make my numbers based off of market rating and my own personal power ratings. And so I'm trying to get into the headspace of the odds maker, right? Like what line are they going to make? Like I've already got my numbers for next week on the expectation of what I think the odds makers are going to make the line to be and what I think the number should be based on my power ratings. And so when I do that, I can look down and see the number be like Chargers -1, or even just pick them, depending again how much you value home field advantage in Cincinnati, which again to me is not much. And so I can look down on that and be like, okay, like that should be pick them, and then think to myself, well, if I was an odds maker, like would I do that based on the fact that obviously public perception right now is really high on the Bengals. So of course I would bump that up. And so they bump it up to 2.5. Like that was the bump that they made in sort of, preparation for people to come in on the Bengals. And even then at 2.5, there, money comes in because it's under a field goal, right? And, bettors see under a field goal for a team they perceive to be better, especially if they're at home. They then make that bet. And that's what pushes it to 3. But you notice that like it didn't get through the 3. Right, which meant there was resistance at 3, and resistance is people betting on the Chargers at +3 because if we all had some patience, those of us who want to back the Chargers in this game, if we all had any amount of patience, we would just let the Bengals money come in and push it through 3, and like you said, go to 4, 4.5, like however far it wants to go. But it becomes this arms race in a way where you have to get in first, so you don't want to be late on the +3 or the +3.5. and miss out on it, right? And so that number sort of ticked to +3.5, where you could get it at like a -113 type of price. And people are just like, that's good enough. That's good enough. I'm going to grab that -113 price tag on +3.5. And that's what's dragged this thing back down to 3. But look at it this way. And I talk about, market pricing and using point spreads to, establish a power rating sort of separate from your own. Look at it this way, right? The Steelers were 6-point underdogs. You can even say 5.5 when they went to LA 2 weeks ago. And a week later, they go to Cincinnati. Nothing really changed other than like, I guess the, TJ Watt's general involvement, but like even then, like not really. And the line is 3.5, right? So even just that direct comparison indicates that the market and the odds makers, and again, we didn't bet this into oblivion one way or another. In fact, money came in on the Steelers, which never really made any sense to me as somebody who was on the Bengals. You look at that and you go, okay, well, 5.5, 3.5. The Chargers are deemed 2 points better than the Bengals. And again, maybe you can tighten that even into 1 point better because of the injury issues that the Steelers had against the Chargers. Maybe you can even tighten that to a pick 'em. But the point is even if the Bengals were 5.5 in the same way that the Chargers were 5.5, a week later, we cannot get to 3, right? There's no way that we can add 3 here just because of, the Chargers are now going on the road, right? Like that's just 3 points is an antiquated concept. And like, by the way, let's just fire some shots here. If you hear anybody in the sports betting space refer to home field advantage as 3 points, they are flat out wrong. They are 10 years behind as far as anybody considering that to be the case. My number on average is like 1.6. And even sometimes I sit around and wonder if I'm a little bit too high. Now that's an average because that factors in places that I think do have a little bit more of a home field advantage. The Denvers, the Miamis, especially early on in the season when it's supremely hot in Miami, some of the domes, on night games, like that kind of thing. And it's like, I'm only just getting over 2 points when that's the case. And then there's places like New York or, quote unquote, New Jersey, where it's like a half point at best, not because the New York teams are, having any kind of advantage at home. It's really more just the other team that's having to travel. And that's worth just a half point because look at the numbers, right? Road home doesn't mean as much as it used to. And it's very, very small scenarios where it does, right? There was a time where the Saints would have won that game outright last night at home, just based on the idea that the dome is rocking. And even with sort of a subpar lineup, they'd be able to not just compete, which they did compete for the vast majority of that game, right? That game was close up until the penalty that we talked about. But yeah, if you're hearing people talk about 3 points as a home field advantage, absolutely not, right? It's 1.5. Maybe it's a 3 point swing, right? If you go from home to road, right? Like you're going from 1.5 in your favor to 1.5 on the other side. Yes, that's fine. But in this case, we've already established that Cincinnati is the home team in both of these comparisons with the Steelers games. So again, these are teams that are at the very best case scenario equal. This line should be -1. Give me the Chargers +3.
I like it. I'm right there with you. Chargers +3. Let's go. Interested in the next one as well, as we have the 8-3 Bucks, who are 11-point favorites in Atlanta to take on the Falcons. And the Falcons and Bucks normally play interesting games, I'll say, where, Matt Ryan's hanging around, but ultimately it comes down to, as you like to say, converting touchdowns instead of field goals. But to keep this way more simple for me, and I say this every week, I'm going to always lean towards taking the double-digit points and then being talked out of it. So
Yeah.
I'm going to sit here, and it's as hard as it is for me to be like, yeah, I'm going to take Matt Ryan and the points here.
Right.
That's just where I'm going to start. And I need you to talk me out of it.
No, I'm not going to, because I like the Falcons in this game too against the spread. I wrote about their chances to win the game outright in my upset of the week column over at the Score. And like, that's, there are some times where I feel like a team's actually going to win the game outright. And that's when I'll put in like a 3.5 point underdog, a 4 point underdog, something along those lines, where it's like, yeah, I think this team is very live to win this game. And there are other times where it's just a strictly numbers based type of thing. Right. And then you sort of have to retrofit a concept around that idea. Right. And you and I have talked about in past, mostly with the Chiefs, right? Like the money line and the point spreads having to be attached, but the money line is a better reflection of a team's likelihood to win for obvious reasons. And so I look at it this way. If you were tasked to write about an upset of the week and you had sort of made the rules that they have to be sort of a 4 point underdog or higher, like, do you want to back the Lions? I mean, just at any time in the world, right? Like, no.
I mean, not by choice.
Right. And do you want to back the Jets? Like, no. Do I want to back the Texans? Right. Like those three teams are kind of, I don't want to like cross them off, because listen, I might be on the Jags next week as far as the upset of the week is concerned. But like, those are three teams that even if the point spreads are 7, and early in the week, the Texans one was 7.5. This has since moved to 10. Speaking of double-digit point spreads, but like, would you rather do that, or would you rather at least take a team with, as much as he frustrates us, a veteran quarterback who can at least get players in the right spots and maybe not have illegal formations ruin plays and all of those sorts of things that screw over inexperienced quarterbacks, and a team that's won 5 games now. Again, terrible opposition by and large. Don't get me wrong on any of that, right? But like, just the idea that like they're in the hunt for the playoffs, like at least we know at this point. And as we go through the season, whether it's the upset of the week, whether it's underdog round robin money line parlays, right, they become more difficult to win because we know more about these teams, and the underdogs that late in the season have lost faith, right? They have lost hope. You're not going to get the same scrappy effort out of the Lions. You're not going to get the same sort of effort out of the Jaguars or the Texans late in the season. And we're starting to veer into that point of the season, right? The good news is we've stacked enough cash early on in the season that we can still play the game, right? Because I don't think anybody wants the upset of the week or the round robin underdog moneyline parlay to go away, because it's just an incredibly fun bet on a day where we have a ton of bets, 10 props that I put out, right? Teasers, obviously spread bets, contest plays, Survivor if someone's somehow still around, like all of these fun things that we do. And it's like, oh, by the way, we're also going to throw in a little, 1 unit money line parlay. We don't want that to go away, even if it becomes less likely for these teams to win. Now, the point in all of this is to say, the Falcons are plus 400, even better in some places, right? That indicates that they only have a 20% chance of winning this game. And like, I could tell you there's a 30% chance that they win this game, or a 35% chance that they win this game. And like, it's either going to be yes or no, right? Like they either do or they don't. And again, if there's a 70% chance that the Buccaneers win this game, they will probably win the game, and we'll all sit around and be like, what an idiot Matt is for saying the Falcons have the chance to win this game. But fundamentally for me, I just look at the last 3 matchups. I look at the bet that we made in week 2 of the season, where it was a 12.5, 13-point spread in favor, obviously, of the Bucs. And that's a 3-point game going into the fourth quarter. And the Falcons had moved the ball against the Bucs defense. And the Falcons had gotten some, unusual for them, some pressure against Tom Brady. And again, he ended up throwing for 5 touchdowns, which is the headline, right? It's the headline that shows up at halftime of Sunday Night Football, or the lead into Sunday Night Football. Tom Brady throws 5 touchdowns, but he didn't throw for 300 yards in that game. Matt Ryan threw for 300 yards in that game. And you go back to last year, and it's funny how they're all the same, right? Falcons have lead in the starting the fourth quarter by 3 or 4 points. Buccaneers lead by 3 or 4 points starting in the fourth quarter. If that's the case, if the Falcons are even down 3 points going into the fourth quarter, you're going to feel pretty good about 2 things. You're going to feel pretty good about Atlanta plus 11 and a half. That's out there right now. And you're going to feel pretty good about your bet. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to win. In fact, it's Matt Ryan and the Falcons Falcons, whether they have a lead or they don't, it's Matt Ryan in the fourth quarter, right? He's still probably not going to win. But if the game is a one possession game going into the fourth quarter, and of course there are no guarantees that that is the case, but all we can do is look at the last 3 games and be like, for whatever you want to think about the Falcons this year or last, and by the way, they weren't any good last year, right? Like it's not like, well, they were good last year. It's like, no, they were awful last year too. They were even worse last year and still able to compete in this matchup. And so I look at it just from that standpoint where it's like, okay, if we could get this game as a 1-score game, we're sitting on a plus 400 money line ticket and we have plus 11.5. Now, again, the game might start in Atlanta. Tom might be just firing it up and down the field, and we might be down 14 points at halftime. Completely reasonable possibility. I wouldn't necessarily say probability, but again, I'm just looking for something that's 60% to cover. I'm just looking for something that's better than 20% to win outright. And for me, that's the Falcons this week based on how we've seen this matchup. And we talk about these divisional games, NFC West, AFC West, with the Chargers going to the Broncos this past weekend, previous to this. Obviously we talk even in Atlanta and New Orleans. We talk about New Orleans and Tampa, these divisional matchups, right? These things tend to repeat themselves in a lot of times in manifestation of close games, right? Like NFC East always somehow end up being close games because these teams know each other, right? Like the matchups exist. They don't change on a game-to-game basis, right? You have a lower concept of volatility. Now, the good news is, as much as we lost that first game between Tampa and Atlanta because Matt Ryan just kept throwing deflected pick sixes, right? Like that on the scoreboard is affecting, right? Because you look at the scoreboard and you go, man, like they lost by 18 points or whatever. Like that's brutal. And, Tampa Bay runs that score up, but you look at the box score and you go, Atlanta had more yards than the Buccaneers did, right? And if we were making that bet, right, like you would think that I was insane too, right? And so just the idea that like these teams have competed, the matchups are what they are. I fully expect Tampa Bay to pull away in the fourth quarter, but as long as this is close, we're going to show value. We're going to have value on the money line here, and particularly the point spread at plus 11.5.
I like it. Taking the points. Now, another double-digit spread here. We have the 7-4 Rams at home, favored by 13 points against the Jags. Again, much the same here, where the initials, my starting point, take the points. But then I pump the brakes for a sec, and I'm going to ask you something here, because the Rams might not show up against the good teams, but I feel like they might show up and like beat up on the bad ones. So could this be a scenario where this is a get back game for the Rams who desperately need it? Or are the issues deeper with Stafford and maybe the injuries, and this just isn't really a thing, and the Jags can be pesky in this and should be on the points?
I think that's the case. I think that's the latter here, because what about the Rams are the Rams of the past, right? And a lot of people have made, the sort of argument that it's like, well, last year they had Jared Goff and not Matthew Stafford, right? But last year they stayed within the fundamental structure of what the Rams do. You talked about it on the podcast on Tuesday, how like when they had Jared Goff, they were forced to be a run-based team, and everything came off the play action pass. And Robert Woods was doing like behind the line of scrimmage, just zoomies back and forth in motion and just cut blocking the bleep out of people, and was affecting the run game in a positive way, and had been doing so since the days of Todd Gurley. And they find a guy in Cam Akers who I think is outstanding. Hopefully he comes back in the same form that he was when he left, with I believe is an ACL injury from the preseason. But like that guy's gone, and it's like, well, Darrell Henderson can do it. And it's like, well, nah, not really. Like he is just a replacement level guy. And same thing with Sony Michel. And so it's like, okay, well, mangled Matt Stafford, is he better than Jared Goff? Like, yes, sort of fundamentally, as far as like, yeah, I'd rather have him with the patrols back there, but like, it doesn't really fit the same way that they've had success, right? Like they don't, Jared Goff and Matt Stafford don't really do the same things. Like Matt Stafford wants to be in shotgun on every play, right? Well, if you think of the Rams being successful, like shotgun is not the thing. It's Jared Goff under center, faking handoffs and finding easy throws. You're not seeing that with Matt Stafford, who again, injured, right? And obviously Robert Woods injured. And Odell Beckham's not doing the same stuff, right? Odell Beckham's over there. He's running go routes. He's running comebacks. He's running outs. He's running whatever, right? He's not taking slants to the house. As I say that, maybe he will, right? Like he is, we talked about this, he's Van Jefferson at this point. That's not a slight on Van Jefferson. Van Jefferson probably like grew up dying to be compared to Odell Beckham. But the point is like, these are just guys who run routes. They don't do the extra stuff. All of that is to say, like, I mean, it's scary to always bet on the Jaguars here, but at least this is a team that since they came back from their bye week, since they had that trip to London where they got their first victory, the defense has yet to give up more yards per play than league average. They have kept it below 5.6 yards per play against every team that they face. Now, sometimes that's manifested itself into a competitive game against, say, the Bills where they won, against the Colts on the road where they had the ball at midfield driving to potentially win the game. And those two teams are pretty good teams, right? I know the records and the ups and downs of the season indicate that maybe they're not as good as we thought they might be, but these are still the quality teams of the league. These teams are no different than the Rams, right? This giant patch of teams that is like 25 deep where anybody can beat anybody on any given week. Now, again, I just mentioned if I'm looking to write about an upset of the week and I've got the Falcons in one hand who have a track record of competing against the Bucs versus the Jags on the other hand, who are even, favored by even less or underdogs by even more, I should say. Yeah. Obviously, I'm going to pick the Falcons in that case, but I don't know that there's any difference between these two as far as likelihood of victory. And so if that's the case, then yeah, obviously I'm on the Jags. And you go, well, how could the Rams possibly lose to a bad team at home? They beat up bad teams all the time. Well, I will forward you to the 0-13 New York Jets from last season, walking in to the Los Angeles, what is it called? SoFi Stadium.
SoFi?
Yeah. And they go and they upset relatively comfortably the Rams, right? And so it's not like the Rams are impervious to just absolutely gacking one at home against a really bad team. And I think the Jaguars are a much better team than that whatever team that the Jets were last year. Right. And like Trevor Lawrence can at least make the throws. Now they have a ton of sloppiness, right? And that's the bad part of what we sort of think of Urban Meyer. As much as he's got the X and O's going potentially defensively, and maybe the offense is getting a little bit better. They figured out that James Robinson is a guy that they need to be using. They still false start, illegal motion, like all of that BS that jams up drives. They still have some bad route runners on that team who are causing Trevor Lawrence to have interceptions and just general inaccuracies, because it's a two-part thing, right? Like you look and you watch it, we watch the camera go to the quarterback, he throws it, and we go, is this going to go well or is this not going to go well? We do that in a millisecond, and then we see the ball flail over either too high or too low of a receiver, and we just assume that Trevor Lawrence is terrible. Well, we saw some pretty good accuracy all throughout his college career. Maybe it's the chemistry, right? And again, maybe it's the wide receivers that are not running these routes in a correct way. So all that is to say, like, this stuff is fixable. It's not necessarily going to get fixed this week. The Jags went to LA last year and played the Chargers and hung with them and probably should have covered that game and given them a bigger scare. So again, they're not unfamiliar with this situation. The Rams aren't unfamiliar with losing to bad teams. And it's just a Rams team that's just wildly overrated, right? And if some of the market does go into this game just assuming that the Rams are going to walk over a bad team, because much of their resume this year has been made off of walking over bad teams. If they just assume that they're going to do that because they did it pre-Robert Woods injury, right? Like, we're beating up on the Titans every week because of the injuries that they've sustained to key players. We have to start doing that with the Rams here. And so they cannot be 13-point favorites. I expect this line to actually dip down a little bit here towards kickoff, because I think a lot of people of my ilk who look at this and see that number at 13 and go, I wonder maybe if we can get a little greedy here, if this will tick up to 14. I don't see that happening. I think it would have by now if that was the correct move. I think it's more likely that it comes back the other way, a point or two, as we get closer to Sunday. Give me the Jags here plus the 13 in this one. Anything higher than double digits, I think, is a pretty good bet.
Interesting. I like it though. Taking the points again. I like this theme. As you know, I'm enjoying the points. And we talked about it last week, right? Just in terms of the crazy numbers over the overall season, right? with the underdogs and the success of that. And this one, it's pretty easy to take the 13 points in this one. So I got you. I want to know if you're going to take the points here, though, with the 0-10 Lions, who are at home as 7-point underdogs to the Vikings. And I mean, I'm instantly just taking the points here, and I don't know if it should be that like straightforward for me. But the Lions, man, I just feel like they got to get things going at some point. And we don't even need them to win. It's just cover 7 points. But with that said, I'm still like, one of these games, they got to pull out and actually win one of these close games, right? And why not this week?
Yeah, they don't have to. They don't, right? Like, they really don't have to, right? Like, whether it's the history of the Lions, right? They have proven they are fully capable of going 0-16, or whether it's just watching them play winnable games against the Steelers, against the Bears, right? Like, or even just go back to like the games early on in the season where we were sort of tricked into thinking that this team might be competitive. And one of those games was the Vikings game. Right? Like they're down 10 points late in that game, and they get a couple of voodoo situations. You know, they end up getting a Kirk Cousins interception, I believe it was, and the Lions go down, they get a field goal, and then Dalvin Cook fumbles when it's like, we're just trying to run the clock out, man. Like, how are you fumbling in that situation? And then the Lions get the touchdown, they go for 2, they get the 2-pointer. You and I had the Vikings in Survivor. We're having a full-on coronary out there, and the Vikings have to come back and kick that field goal. And I think people only remember that very last part, right? The very last part of like the Vikings almost losing to the Lions at home. And then look at this game and go like, this game could be competitive. I don't think so, man. I think that they've sort of shot their metaphorical wad, if you will. And this is going to be a real struggle for the Lions to win a football game. This is going to be a real struggle for them to be competitive here, because Kirk Cousins can tear this secondary apart. Think about the quarterbacks that the Lions have faced in this little stretch here of general competitiveness. Right. We had we had Mason Rudolph. We didn't have Ben Roethlisberger. We had Mason Rudolph in the rain for that tie game, right? Yeah. We had Andy Dalton on Thanksgiving. And listen, I'm going to go to bat for Andy Dalton here a little bit later on in the show, but like, I've already crushed him earlier on the show. So this is going to get really weird here in a sec, but like Andy Dalton and your boy, your man's Baker Mayfield, right? Like these are the 3 quarterbacks that they've faced, right? And like in theory, in years past, you could maybe lump Kirk Cousins into that group, just not this season. And as kind of gross as it looked in San Francisco, where he's lining up behind guard and he's spiking 2-point conversions and he's airmailing 4th down chances and all of those things. But like, it's still Thielen, it's still Jefferson against a street corner festival, right? Like these guys might as well just be making tacos out there, because these corners are straight off of the street for the Lions. And it's like they have survived because of the wide receiving core and because of the quarterbacks that they've played in the last few weeks. But the Vikings can do both. Alexander Madison's going to be able to run the football in the same way like the Eagles were able to run the football, or the Bengals were going to be able to run the football when they went to Detroit and they blew those teams out. And so for those of you who listen to the Atlanta game and the Jacksonville handicap and all of those sorts of things and go like, this guy's just taking points like an absolute maniac, I want to slip this in too. I don't want anything to do with the Houston Texans at +10, right? Part of that is a market move, right? Like my number in that game was 8.5. And so you go, well, that's less than 10. Like you should like the Texans. Well, that number opened 7.5. And I was like confused. I was like paralyzed with like, what do I do here? And so I didn't touch that. And of course the market moved that up to 10. Well, the market hasn't touched the Jags. The market hasn't necessarily touched this one, though I think it will. I think this number ends up at 7.5 here, because I think the fact that it's 7 is sort of allowing, the people to sort of, hey, come on in, take the 7. It's a full touchdown. You push, even if the Vikings just win by a touchdown, like, come on in. Why wouldn't you? Right. Like if the sportsbooks were worried about the Jets in any way, shape, or form, not the Jets, I'm sorry, about the Lions, the Jets game is the same situation, because the Jets are 6.5-point underdogs to Philly, right? Like they are a little bit more worried about the Jets because that line's 6.5. If they were worried about the Lions in the same way that they are about the Jets, this line would be 6.5, but they are not. They are inviting you to take the 7. They will then invite you to take the 7.5 at some point this week. And this is one that is the quote unquote square play here. But I can't really envision a situation here where the Lions can keep up with the Vikings offense that I think is ready here for a big day, because that's just where the Vikings offense is right now. Obviously, DeAndre Swift being out, not helping the Lions in that department either. This feels like Vikings truck for me, in this one. And this is one where I'm actually laying the points in a significant way.
You know what? Maybe this is a thing where I was still being emotional and poor Lions, just feeling bad for them. Maybe maybe they'll need a win at some point, just because, you feel for Dan Campbell at some point.
Sure.
But there were wise words from one of those dudes on Shark Tank. And I remember he would always say all the time, "My money has no emotions." I was like, I love that.
That's a great line.
Let's keep things moving though, because you've talked me into the Vikings here for sure. Because let's be honest here, like, is it really, like, does anyone here begging to bet on the Lions, right? Like,
yeah, you don't need
really
a ton to be talked out of betting on the Lions, right?
Totally.
No.
The Giants. 4-7 Giants are at the Dolphins, who are 4-point favorites, nicely in the Vegas zone. And my question here to you isn't even about where I'm leaning in this game, because I'm more about, like, you talked about the public perception and the narratives and watching like the headlines, what people are talking about. Are they trying to tell me Tua's good right now? Is that what happened?
They're doing? That's what they're doing. Yeah, and this is that perfect example, right? And in a lot of ways, this is why this is on the board here for me as well, because this is the reverse Chargers, right? Like, if you just go 4 days with watching, ESPN in the afternoon, or NFL, these different NFL weekday shows where it's like, we got to talk about something, and it's like they go up and down the list of teams and they go, okay, who's doing really poorly relative to recent? It's like, boom, Chargers. Okay, who's doing really well that we have to, like, it's like they're breaking the news about the standings, right? It's like Dolphins have 4-game win streak or 5-game win streak or whatever. It's like, yeah, man, like, we know, like, we've been watching for the last like 5 games, right? And like, okay, that includes a Cam Newton game. That includes a Tyrod Taylor, Houston Texans, like, let's throw you 4 interceptions, let's turn the ball over 4 times type of a game. And it's like, yeah, the Ravens game, like, we watched all of that, and that was one of the worst games of all time through 3 quarters, and didn't really feel like the Dolphins were doing much in that case. And now all of a sudden, like, Tua comes in halfway through that game and starts getting credit for dismantling, I guess, the Texans. Like, I don't really feel like that's what happened there. I don't really feel like that's what happened with the Panthers, because there was a ton of short fields. They had a block. They started the game as the Dolphins did last season. You and I have talked about, like, the idea of the Dolphins last year defensively versus this year, and them needing to turn teams over to have success. Like, that's what the Dolphins defense was built on. Well, they did it against Tyrod Taylor. They did it against the Panthers, and a little bit they did it against the Ravens as well. So we are actually seeing that from the Dolphins. So this isn't like a full on, like, make it up as we go situation. They are doing the thing that we have asked them to do in the past. That being said, like, they are the brand. The fact of the matter is like, people are fired up right now about the Dolphins, right? It's like, oh, could they make the playoffs? Like, could all of this stuff happen? And listen, maybe they win this game, maybe they cover this game, but this is how value is created, right? And for me, there's just not a way. Again, we joke about flipping the computer over and shaking it to sort of figure out if the numbers are not, why they aren't making sense, and to reshuffle them. There's no way I can get to Giants as 4-point underdogs in this game. Now, they were 3-point underdogs until we found out of the blue on Tuesday that Daniel Jones has a neck injury. And everybody then got to weigh in, because our guy, Mike, don't call me Sean Glennon, is potentially going to start in this game. And he has the world's largest neck. And of course, you would think that he would have a neck strain just by generally walking around. Like, whiplash would be seemingly like a weekly thing for him. And then all of a sudden, Daniel Jones is back and he's practicing this week. And instead of being week to week, he's now questionable for the game. And so this line that was 3 goes to 4.5. And now, just because Daniel Jones steps on the field, it goes to 4. But the big takeaway here is the line just went 1.5 points because Daniel Jones is only worth 1.5 points. Like, how depressing is that for Giants fans, right? That you can sit there and just be like 3, 4.5, like, not that big a deal that Daniel Jones might not play in this game. And so my number comes out to about 1. This is, again, very similar to the Chargers and the Bengals, but for different reasons. In this case, it's because we're overhyping the recency of the Dolphins here. And so now this number's 4 and could be 4.5. Obviously, you would like to know who's going to start. And if we find out that Daniel Jones is going to start, I'm fine with this going back down to 3 and taking that +3, because I know for a fact that we're getting value at +3, because, again, my number is like less than 1 when it comes to this game. If we go up because Glennon gets the call and the number goes up to 4.5, I imagine there's a possibility it goes even higher than that. There's less certainty about Glennon, but we're getting more points, so I would be fine with that too. So we're going to let this news, play out here on the Giants side of things. We'll see how it goes. But either way, we're going to have a bet on the Giants and have a valuable bet on the Giants because of what's been created here with the concept of Tua and all of this sort of, he's obviously, is he better than Justin Herbert? It's like we just spent like 30 weeks of NFL football just knowing that Justin Herbert was that much better than Tua Tagovailoa. And now all of a sudden, like, it's a conversation somehow again. Obviously, I don't think anybody serious is having that conversation, but like, these are the things that pop up over the course of the week that allow you to sort of figure out, oh, there's probably some selling that needs to happen here on this team. And maybe the Dolphins cover this game, and maybe we just have to sell them again next week. Like, that just might be the situation here. But for me, I think this is a really good spot to back the Giants. We just want to wait on the quarterback situation.
All right, the Giants and the points. Let's go. The Arizona Cardinals, who are 9-2, and when I see their win-loss record, which I know we don't really do that here, but I say it just
Sure.
for the the casuals that might be trying to learn some stuff here, right?
Yeah.
I feel like I haven't seen the Cards play in like a month at least. Like, and
right.
then I think about it, it's like, oh yeah, because I wasn't subjecting myself to Colt McCoy, right? Like, I'm not really about that life. Yeah. Now, they're 7.5 point favorites at the Bears. I'm not sure the latest on, like, we're expecting Kyler to play in this game.
I think we're a little bit more likely, but again, time heals all wounds. Does that mean it heals his wounds? We're now, we talked about this being a 3-week injury. That was talked about when it happened, and it sort of got swept under the rug. And we did the, like, is he going to play or is he not going to play? I think because of gamesmanship purposes, it's hard to prepare for Kyler Murray. You have to spend time preparing for Kyler Murray. You don't have to spend a ton of time on Colt McCoy. Now, is that why the Cardinals won 2 games and then lost to Carolina? Like, throw your hands up on that, right? Like, they lose to Carolina at home and they win the road games in the division. Like, the whole thing just doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. And so, I imagine he's probably back. It seems like Hopkins is less likely to be back in this game.
Yeah.
But I think this is a really tricky spot for the Cardinals, right? We've talked about, like, coming off of a bye. Every team coming off of a bye has seemed to sort of struggle out of that bye. And now you go into this sort of weird atmosphere. We talked about home field advantage earlier on in the show. Like, for whatever the Bears have been over their, I don't know, all of their lives, or certainly all of my life, the Soldier Field atmosphere, like, it's one of the few grass stadiums that still exist out there, right? And they seem to grow it up nice and long, or at least somehow it's still grown come December. It's just such a weird place to play, especially for a team that spends all of their time in Arizona. Right? Like, this is a really, like, even before the season, even however you want to frame it, like, I would circle this on my calendar going, like, wait, Arizona is going to go to Chicago in December? Like, that's got, like, weirdness written all over it. Right. And so I think there's a possibility the Bears win this game because at least they have a professional quarterback in Andy Dalton. I know we just spent like the entire hour just wailing on Andy Dalton, past, present, and future. But really, it was just the past, because the present right now, they have a better chance of winning this game, winning any game, with Andy Dalton than they do with Justin Fields. Like, the Justin Fields thing can look good at times, especially when he's using his legs. And we saw some really good signs, especially that Monday Night Football game against the Steelers. Who knows what that game would have looked like if Andy Dalton was playing in that game? I don't know. I just know that he can get these guys into the plays that they need to get into. Now, the problem is for them, Cardinals are a really good team all around, right? Like, and as much as we go, like, is Kyler going to play? Is he not going to play? And how that's wildly affected the lines when that announcements have come out, right? Think about the 49ers game and the Seahawks game being identical in having the Cardinals as like 2.5 point favorites on the road in those games, swinging to those home teams being 5 to 6 point favorites when it was announced that Murray was out. Same thing with the Cardinals at home to the Panthers. The number's 10.5 all week. Kyler's not going to play, and it shoots down below 7, and it might have gone even further. There just wasn't enough time because of how little time there was between the announcement and the game starting. In this case, this number feels like it's Kyler, right? Like this is the Kyler number. This is a lot like the Ravens, 2 weeks ago, I guess, against Chicago, where it's like with Lamar, it should be 7. But we're worried he might not play, so it's 6. And then he doesn't play, and it comes all the way, or he doesn't practice, and it comes to 4, and he doesn't play, and it comes all the way down to 1. It wouldn't come necessarily all the way down to 1 if Colt McCoy was in the lineup, but it would certainly be closer to 3. Now, if you're looking to back the Bears just because of this tough spot that the Cardinals may be in here, I would wait. Let's find out if Kyler does play. Because if he doesn't play, I like the Bears to win the game, and we still might be able to get +3, +3.5. Yeah. And if Kyler Murray does play, what if we get 10? What if we get 10? Like, are we positive that Kyler Murray, if he plays, is going to make it through this game in the cold weather against the Bears? I don't mean like he's going to take some hit or something like that, right? Like, but like a pulled muscle, something along those lines, right? Like, it's a really tough spot where the Cards, as any team ever in the NFL, like they just want to win. Right. So it's not like they're dying to cover this game. Right. And I think the Bears can at least be functional. Obviously, a little bit of rest, a little bit more planning here. They got past that Thanksgiving week where it was like, is Matt Nagy going to get fired? Blah, 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 blah. Right. Like, I think there's a bit of a sort of a rally point here for the Bears, having won the game last week, having been really, really close to winning the game against the Ravens. I think they can be competitive in this game. And so I like them as part of a money line parlay here where we're sort of shooting for the moon with teams like the Jags and the Falcons and the Chargers to a lesser extent. But I certainly like getting as many points as we can possibly get. And I think we can get a little bit more here if Murray plays. And I'm not afraid of that. And if he doesn't, I certainly like the Bears here against the Colt McCoy version of the Cardinals. For as good as the Cardinals have played with McCoy back there, I still think that there's an edge there with the Bears should he be the guy to play. So either way, it's Bears for me. Another situation where we do have to wait on the quarterback to find out what our price point is actually going to be.
Okay. The Bears. You could talk me into that for sure. Cause that's definitely a weird situation and a weird spot for the Cards. A weird spot appears to be the entire season for the Seahawks. Find themselves at home to my Niners. Niners are 3-point favorites. Seahawks played on Monday night, right? Short week for the Seahawks. Yeah. And the Niners, Niners are starting to be a little more functional. I'll say that much.
You're starting to feel it a little bit. I got you.
I am. Shanahan's starting to get
cautiously optimistic.
It's like the breakup with the girlfriend, and Shanahan's trying to like work his way back in, sends the text like, hey, how you doing?
Yeah. Or he sees the writing on the wall about a potential breakup and is like, I got to save this thing before it goes off the rails, right? Because like that's where this thing was headed, where everybody was sort of like, I don't know if I even like him anymore. Because people were infatuated. Let's be honest. They were infatuated with Shanahan.
Well, maybe this is ironic, but you could say the same thing here about Russ and the Seahawks. Because my thought is there a scenario where Russ just hurts his finger here at 3-8 and he's just like, I'm going to shut it down for the rest of the season? Bottom line, though, we look at this game right here. I don't like it, but I want to lay the 3 points with the Niners.
Yeah. So this has been 3.5. I think this will be 3.5 again. This is sort of a 3.25, right? Where it's like you have to pay a little bit more to get to 3.5, or you have to pay a little more to give the 3 with the 49ers. I've already bet the Seahawks plus 3.5. It was one that it took me a couple of days to do so emotionally. But fundamentally, I look up and down the 49ers injury report. And as you know, right, whether it's relationships or otherwise, sometimes we just can't have nice things. And in this case, the 49ers cannot have good health. And what has been the difference maker for the 49ers, at least offensively? It's been Deebo Samuel. And it does not appear like Deebo is going to play in this game, which now means that the 49ers revert back to sort of generic offense, right? They don't have that guy. Whether it's Cordarrelle Patterson or Deebo Samuel, like these are two guys that if they go out, you're screwed. Like there's just not, like there isn't a guy, you don't just like turn and go like, well, you can be Deebo or like you can be Cordarrelle Patterson, right? Like these guys are the unicorns of the NFL, where like maybe you put a Brandon Ayuk in that role. I don't see that being the option. You know, Kyle Juszczyk, like maybe it's like, no, like none of that sort of works, right? They have to become more generic and easier to prepare for. Now, from a market standpoint, we just talked about Cardinals were 2.5 at Seattle 2 or 3 weeks ago, right? Before the Kyler gets ruled out and Colt McCoy comes in. Now you might be making the case, well, it would be higher if Kyler Murray was like clean bill of health and he was definitely going to start. And that 2.5 number was sort of a early preparation for the possibility that he might not play. And I would say to you, okay, fine. Make them 3.5 point favorites then on the road, because crossing that key number of 3 is worth more than just one simple point, as we know.
Yeah.
Is San Francisco the same team as the Cardinals at this point? Like I have, in a couple of different situations, tried to make the case that the 49ers can be competitive and can beat the Cardinals, only to watch them shoot themselves in the foot in a couple of different games and make me look foolish in this situation. But from a market standpoint, the 49ers cannot be rated the same as the healthy Arizona Cardinals. They kind of are in this number, because of the success that the 49ers have had recently. We didn't even talk about the defensive injury report right now. Your Drake Greenlaws, your Fred Warners, not necessarily out for sure. It looks like Greenlaw is probably more likely to be out, Warner more likely to be in. But a couple of these guys just banged up, right? Everybody's favorite phrase. Nobody's ever injured. Somebody's always, oh, this guy's banged up. We don't know. What does that mean? 15%? 90%? Oh, he's banged up. 49ers defense banged up. And it's like, okay, that's reason to bet against them. For me, the reason is the matchup. And you mentioned like maybe this is a situation coming down the stretch here where the Seahawks just absolutely blow it up. And this game might be the indicator of that, even though we probably said that about the game before and the game before that. We talked about the NFC West in the past last year, right? Like the circle of death, if you will, in the NFC West. Like, what are the rules? And you go, okay, Seattle. Who does Seattle own? Well, Rams maybe a little bit. But like we just watched them win by 2 touchdowns in San Francisco like 2 months ago. And this is the exact same Seahawks team, right? And again, maybe it's torn apart from the inside, and that's the difference here. And that's what will be the sort of be all and end all when it comes to this game. Again, like whether it was that last glimpse of Russell Wilson working that last 2-minute drill on Monday night, like I just can't quit him, right? I just can't quit this idea of the Seahawks being home underdogs to a team that they've already beaten this year and that they have beaten in the past, or at least competed with in the past, even when the 49ers were at their best here. If I can get the +3.5 out there, I am taking the +3.5 here with the Seahawks. And I promise it is officially last rites with the Seahawks if they don't cover this game. And honestly, maybe even if they do and they lose outright, it still might be the same circumstance here. But yes, give me the Seahawks plus the 3.5.
I've been zigging and zagging on my Niners the whole season, and the injuries are key. And the real reason why you're talking me into the Seahawks right now is because of Deebo. Like the Deebo thing is a massive, massive part of their offense. And if they can't move the ball, I mean, yeah.
Well, and
things
look
will
at
be
it
tough,
this way.
and it'll get really, really ugly. And it's not like it's pretty to begin with, right?
Right.
So,
well, that's what I mean. Like if he was in the lineup, right? Like what would this line be? If he was just in line, like, would it be 5.5? Would it be 6? Like that seems too high with him in the lineup. And so if he's not in the lineup, then 3.5 kind of has to feel a little bit too high as well, which I think is why we've seen buy-in on the Seahawks here at +3.5, which is now has that line toggling back and forth. So yeah, man, I think he's just a player who cannot be priced accordingly into the point spread at this point. Like he is an underrated element to what they do there.
I got you. Let's move on though, as we head to the Ravens, who are 4.5 point favorites in Pittsburgh. And this matchup used to mean a little something different than what it means right now. And, I felt like this series was always a classic whoever the home team was favored by 3, essentially, for so many
100%.
years.
Yeah.
So I look at this now, and the Vegas zone obviously sticks out, makes me take the pause. And I'm going to be honest with you. My initial lean here is maybe the Steelers just really, really suck.
I think that's a fair lean. Like, that's been our kind of general concept for the whole season, a lot of ways, right? Yes. And that was the general concept going into the year, because, you know, you'll recall, like, they were 6.5-point underdogs to the Buffalo Bills. Now, would that line be the same now? Like, probably, but only because we have confirmed that the Steelers do in fact stink. Here's the problem, though. Like, they're still the Steelers. And so I will admit to you, I have a bet on the Baltimore Ravens on this game. I bet them at minus 3.5 on Tuesday. I am getting off of that bet, and I'm coming back the other way on the Steelers at plus 4.5, because the more, you know, you go like, God, the Steelers are awful, and like the Ravens just somehow pull stuff out and like blah, blah, blah. But then I sit back and you just go like, wait a minute, what did I really watch on Sunday night when it comes to the Ravens, and how does that change, you know, the fun exercise of keeping rating teams and keeping those ratings up to date is you get to sit there and you go like, do I move that team up or do I move that team down based on the game that I just saw? And again, it's easy to go, oh, well, they won, they covered, I should move them up, or they won, they covered, and I should keep them where they are. But if you're watching that Ravens team on Sunday night, like, I think it's they won, they covered, and I'm moving them down. Right? I have to drop them down. And then I go and I look at the Steelers rating and I go, yeah, it's already pretty low, right? Like, it's already really, really low. Like, again, one game blowout, like a game that, you know, we didn't necessarily see blowout coming, but like you and I had plotted for Cincinnati to be our survivor pick on Sunday. Again, infuriating that it won that easily in a weird way. And so
why'd you have to bring it up, man? Why'd you have to bring it up?
I then come 2 days. I promise we'll kind of get over it in the next couple of weeks. But you know, it then takes me a couple of days here to sort of watch the line go up to 4.5. And then you just go like, you're right, man. Like, it doesn't really matter what the matchup is. It doesn't really matter who's playing. These Ravens Steelers games, divisional matchup, same thing with the Seattle San Francisco, the Atlanta Tampa Bay. Like, that's the theme of this week, is that, like, you know, hell or high water, somehow these games end up being close, or these games end up being, you know, upsets or whatever. And the fact that we're getting 4.5 points with the Steelers team, that whether it's, again, Seahawks, very same sort of concept here. It's like, team looks dead, veteran coach, veteran quarterback, like, do they muster it for one last sort of shot here? Because in both cases, if those teams, and listen, the Seahawks season's probably already over, but I think they care enough to play against San Francisco in a big way. And I think the Steelers at least have the benefit of being like, no, I don't think our season's over. Like, we can still get into the last, you know, wild card. And because they've, you know, obviously it's a game where if they win this game, they are handing the Ravens a loss, right? It is the proverbial 4-point game, you know, in other sports that count by 2 points. Like, this is a big time game here. Again, I don't know that the Steelers are going to win. I have included them in money line parlays. It's just one of those games where they're going to slop it up. This could be 13-10. This could be 17-13. This could be overtime. This could be all of those things. You have to take the points here with the Steelers. And again, if they lose at home by more than 4.5, you just go, okay, like, that's it. It's never going to be any, again, maybe TJ Watt doesn't play, you know, we don't necessarily know that for sure yet. Again, I don't, and that's why we're getting that extra point plus of value here. Obviously the blowout is the element there as well from last week. If they didn't get blown out by the Bengals, if they didn't lose TJ Watt, this game is certainly under 3. The Bengals thing doesn't matter. The TJ Watt thing does. But for me, again, 4.5 points with the Steelers. I don't know how they're going to do it. I kind of think they win this game outright, and we're just unable to kill the Steelers. And again, if they end up keep covering, I don't know that we want to kill them, right? Like, I'm happy to have them around if we can trust them to bet on them and have them win. That's the only thing that matters to me. I could care less about anything else going on with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Just cover this week.
I love that you said that, and it's almost like you were teeing me up for what I was going to close out this Steelers combo on, because you're talking about what matters and what doesn't, and you're saying you don't care about anything else other than the cover. because Chase Claypool said maybe the dumbest thing I've ever heard, that he thinks they're not winning because of they haven't been listening to the right music in practice. And it's like, and the reactions from who was a defensive player? Hayward, was it?
It might have been. Yeah, that sounds right.
One of their defensive players were just like, I'm going to get him. Right? Like, it was basically just like,
is it possible?
What are you talking about?
Is it possible that Canadian Chase Claypool had seen the Jagged documentary and was looking to bump some Alanis Morissette during practice? Is that a rumor we should get started? Was he looking to get a little "you ought to know" going during warmups? I don't know. I'm just trying to connect the dots here with Chase Claypool and his Canadian heritage.
Whatever works to get you fired up, right? Whatever works. And if that's Alanis, sure, more power to you. I'm not going to be mad at you. Right. But before we get to the Sunday nighter here, I just want to give a little reminder that the DRF Sports Sunday Scoop e-newsletter, if you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up for free at drf.com/sports to receive 2 free weekly newsletters delivered to your email inbox every Friday and Sunday. Both are packed with powerful betting angles you don't want to miss. Make sure you sign up for the Sunday Scoop e-newsletter and check out Scott Grambling's weekly 6-pack in both the NFL and NCAA, plus, of course, his in-depth game previews. All of that and more, drf.com/sports. We've got you covered there and here as we continue with the Broncos, who are heading into Kansas City. Kansas City, 9.5-point favorites. That seems to be a lot of points to me. Now, I get that the Chiefs have been playing a little bit better. Their defense is clearly playing better. And I get that. 9.5 points is still a lot. And I feel like I got to take the points.
Yeah, I do too. And this is one that we talk about sort of in retrospect a lot of times, where the lines come out on Sunday. You are absolutely positive about a bet, not that it's going to win, but that it's a valuable bet and it's a good idea and blah, blah, blah. So I bet Denver plus 10 early on in the week. And I'm like, yep, it's going to be in contest. Like, I'm absolutely hitting this, like, every which way, included in the money line parlay, all of these, sorts of thoughts. And as much as we like that there's 6-7 days between games here, and we get to sort of flush out sort of the right sides, the wrong side, where's value, what are, the idiots talking about on ESPN, what are, the bettors sort of lining up to just go over the cliff on some of these teams. This is one like the Colts a couple of weeks ago at the Bills, where it's like, that's too many points. I'm definitely taking the points. And then by this like sort of Sunday or Saturday rolls around, you just go like, is everybody doing this? Is everybody on the Broncos? Because if everybody's doing that, like, I don't want to, because again, that sort of decreases value. And you see it now, at least in the line move. If the line didn't move, I'd be even a little bit more concerned about it, because I haven't seen anybody go like, yep, let's lay 2 touchdowns or lay 10 points with the Chiefs, like absolutely into that. And the line has moved down to 9.5. And I realized that that's not going to come down that much lower because of teaser protection. We talked briefly about the Colts and the Texans and that line moving up, because they opened that 7.5 and immediately everybody's like, teasing it down to 1.5 is an incredibly valuable teaser, like even for a road favorite of the Colts' ilk, because the Texans stink. And so you're not going to get an 8.5 here with the Chiefs, because they're not going to let you tease this thing down to 3. If they do, that really gives me an indication that the books actually do think this game is going to be close, with the Broncos having a chance to win. That being said, I still can't lay the points with Kansas City. I've made the bet plus 10. It's really just going to sort of fall down the hierarchy of my plays this week and might not make it into that top 5 for the Circa Millions contest, which we are in contention right now for the money. And so I'm probably talking myself out of a winner at an upper echelon type of level. I've made the bet at plus 10. I am fine with that bet, because I can't imagine taking Kansas City in this situation. And so, like, again, it's funny because I'm like, hopefully it still wins. Like, I still want the bet to win. It's I'm going to feel stupid when it does win. And I knocked it down that sort of hierarchy level for, how I want to play that game this week. From a football standpoint, it's odd because it's not a Broncos Chiefs game that I care about sort of comparing this game to. It's actually a Panthers Chiefs game that I want to compare this to from last season when Teddy Bridgewater was the quarterback of the Panthers, and they were about 10 point, I think they were 11 point underdog going into Kansas City. And what they did was they slowly matriculated the ball down the field and were able to score just enough to hang with. And I think that game came down to a final field goal. I think your boy Joey Sly was with Carolina, and they had to try a 60-yarder for the win, and they didn't get it. And so, obviously different teams here, but at least offensively with what Teddy Bridgewater is capable of doing, and at least game plan wise, he's going to have an understanding of like what this defense will allow him to do. He at least has some weaponry to be able to do that with. He doesn't have Christian McCaffrey like he did last year in this game, but there's certainly enough other guys here that they're going to be able to do that. And then fundamentally, as it always comes down to Chiefs games with big point spreads, what can they do in the red zone, right? Can the Broncos force field goals? Because if you look at it from a 10-point spread standpoint, if you can force 3 field goals, that's 9 and you still cover, right? Like that might be the difference in this game, is forcing Harrison Butker out there for 3 field goals and otherwise having the Broncos match whatever else the Chiefs are able to do. So I think the Broncos can do that. I just hope, in a weird way, obviously I hope the bet wins, but maybe I'm overthinking it over the course of the week, and this is an easier bet to win than I've sort of allowed myself to sort of distance from. But that's where I'm at with this game, and I think it'll be a fun game on Sunday night.
This game might be the game of the entire weekend, or at least in terms of the hype machine.
Yeah.
In the AFC East, right?
You
got the Patriots who are 8-4. The Bills are 7-4. Bills at home at 2.5-point favorites. And this one is really tough for me. And I'm going to talk more football here than the actual gambling thing. But the reason it's tough for me is because this plays out as a Belichick setup game. Like, he's not coming out with the full playbook in this game against the Bills, because he knows that they have to play them again in a couple of weeks, and then could potentially have to play them in the playoffs. And I'm reading too much into it, the Belichick Jedi mind tricks, but this just strikes me as a game where he's going to try to do enough he's going to try to win, obviously, but they're not pulling out the full playbook for this one.
God, I
but
love
even
that
with
take.
that said, give me the points and I'm riding with Belichick.
Okay. I love that take. Like, that's just the type of stuff that we need more of. I don't disagree with it. It's not like it's some like blazing hot, like electro take or anything like that, but it's just like, it's just fun enough to really tickle my funny bone. I'm on the opposite side here. I think this is buy low, sell high city at -2.5. It dipped down to -2.5, even not even money, but like -110 on either side. I grabbed that -2.5. It's -2.5 in contest, probably going to end up on my contest card, because there's going to be a lot of liking of the Patriots here. That makes sense. They've covered 6 games in a row, right? Like, they have shifted some of their defensive tendencies, and that's worked out. But it doesn't change the fact that the teams that they have played have been lackluster. And if it wasn't for a pick 6, and listen, the defense is allowed to contribute offensively, especially when they are a very good defense. I get it. But if it wasn't for that, right? Like, the Chargers did have a lead against the vaunted Patriots in the 4th quarter of their matchup not that long ago. I know no one's willing to recall that, because the Chargers ended up losing the game on that pick 6, but it's a thing that existed. Buffalo, obviously, a little bit soured on, right? We've got big time losses at home against the Colts, and the Patriots do play a lot like the Colts do, where it's like, let's not go crazy here with our quarterback. Let's run the football, all of those sorts of things here. And again, Patriots could very well win this game. I would be tremendously impressed if on a Monday night in Orchard Park, that's what Mac Jones was able to come in and do. And I realize it's not about Mac Jones. You know how I feel about the Patriots from a big picture standpoint. This just does feel like on the Mac Jones Man in the Arena documentary 20 years from now, when they hit this game, they're going to be like, yeah, we took a little bit of a step back in a tough situation and then we won 5 games in a row after that. And we finished, 12-5, and we've, won the Super Bowl, right? It's like, this is just one where it's like, yeah, it was a real real eye opener, like that type of thing here for the Patriots. I think this is like as close to this is close to the Super Bowl before the Super Bowl as the Bills are going to get. We saw a similar game with them against the Chiefs earlier on, right? Yeah. That revenge element, that like circle the calendar. And if you are the Bills team who went to the AFC Championship last year, and there are only so many games on your calendar that you have circled, right? They don't have the Jags game circled on the calendar. Is that an excuse? No, it shouldn't be. They don't have game circled on their calendar. The Colts had it circled on their calendar. It's why we like the Colts so much, because that was a revenge spot for them. And as much as like the revenge spot concept can be a little bit whatever dicey, if we'd always talk about, okay, you have 4 games a year where you're going to absolutely be awesome. You're going to have 4 games a year where you're going to be absolutely terrible. And then everything else in between is just going to be middle of the road. Let's see who gets the bounce, essentially. This is one where the Bills, I think, are going to be very good in this game. And maybe it sets up that they're not as good the next time around for reasons that you just mentioned, because Bill's pulling out the tricks for the home game. And maybe he's looking at it going like, hey, we've drawn even. We're like a half step ahead of this team. And by the way, the Bills have the Buccaneers next week. So you can sort of, if you're even in the Patriots mindset, go, yeah, they might lose next week, and then we'll get them at home at Foxborough. And like that would be, in theory, the game to quote unquote clinch, not literally, but sort of figuratively clinch the AFC East. Like this is a much bigger game, as weird as it sounds, for the Bills. It's exciting for us because of how the Patriots have played coming into this game and where they are in the standings. I'm very excited about this game. But from a valuation standpoint, market number, my number, all have the Bills over 3, 3.5 type of a thing. We can get them under 3. And so that's just a fundamental play that I'm going to make every single time. And if I can sort of, retrofit a narrative around that, which I can with the Bills being successful in this game in a couple of different ways, certainly through the air, right? If the conditions are bad, Josh Allen probably better suited for the conditions than Florida-bred Alabama, more bread, I guess, quarterback in Mac Jones, right? Like he grows up in Alabama after being a Florida quarterback for a long time, right? Like this is as cold as it's ever going to get for Mac Jones here in these conditions that I think is going to have some snow involved, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, I like the Bills in this game here, minus the 2.5 points. So again, like as far as, we have a lot of underdogs on the card here. Those are the ones that we like to talk about. The ones that we don't talk about on a week-to-week basis usually means I'm leaning to the favorite, but as somebody who's loath to sort of give out a favorite as a best bet or play a favorite as a best bet, something over 3, games like Washington, Las Vegas, kind of like Las Vegas as a small favorite. I mean, they're only down to like -1, -1.5 there, kind of like Philly, -6.5 there. And again, don't want anything to do with the Texans. So this is one of the few favorites that I like as a quote unquote best bet. It doesn't mean that everything is just underdog. We do have a couple of favorites that we like this week, Dallas, Minnesota, among some of the others as well.
I like it. And to round out that Pats thing, it's super interesting to me because I was right there. And then the emotion says to take Belichick. Right? Like it's interesting. Sure. Like think about it, right? The whole thing, it's like the spot is one thing that you talk about a lot that I've been learning and understanding. And the spot for the Bills is a much bigger spot for them to win this game than it is for the Patriots. And I said it, the Pats could lose this game and Belichick sitting back like, yeah, okay,
still cool, fine.
No worries. Yeah. We're still fine. We're still okay. We're still rolling, right? So that's very, very, very interesting. We love the picks that you always give us and helping me out for sure. But there's also some major football going on in the NCAA. We know the college football playoff is getting closer and closer. But before then, an epic Saturday coming up of conference championships. So there's so many games that will be a lot of fun to just lay some money on. So I'm going to sit back and I just want to listen to you tell me where I should be hitting the money this Saturday.
Yeah, we talked on Tuesday about Friday's games. So again, if you're listening to this before these games, the good news is you can still make a bet on these games. The bad news is the value has been taken away. And that's good news for us as far as closing line value and that sort of thing. We talked about Western Kentucky in the Conference USA Championship game at UTSA. That number was -1, -1.5. You could even have gotten a money line at like -120 as of Tuesday's podcast. Unfortunately, this thing's gone off the rails. This thing's 3 and 3.5 right now for Western Kentucky on the road against UTSA. That is way too rich for my blood at this point. In fact, we're getting to a point where I think I would take UTSA, but I've already got Western Kentucky in the old accounts. Oregon +3, if that's still available to you. Some places may have that at a reasonable price. Maybe that pops back up by the time kickoff kicks in the Pac-12 championship on Friday night, but that's stuff that we talked about on Tuesday as well. As for Saturday, started off Baylor and Oklahoma State. Obviously, Oklahoma State with a very real possibility of making the college football playoff. That can be a little bit scary, right? Teams can get a little bit tight here, but they have a benefit of having A, played Baylor already this season, and B, there's some major concerns about whether Gary Bohannon can play in this game. And the backup quarterback not really offering the same sort of threat that Bohannon does for Baylor. And even when Bohannon played for Baylor against Oklahoma State's defense was fine dealing with him. They had a little bit more of a tough time dealing with the run game from Baylor here. I think they have that tightened up. Obviously, coming off of the victory in the Bedlam game, there's going to be a couple of spots here. Last week was so electric with some of these teams that them having to get back up for a second game here could be an issue, but it's a championship game. This one's in Jerry World, right? You are the Cowboys. Maybe you're not the Dallas Cowboys, you're the Oklahoma State Cowboys, but that should mean something to them. I've laid the points here, but I laid it at -4 earlier on in the week. The line has moved up to 5.5. Anything under 6, I think, still has some value here on the Cowboys, and you hope that Bohannon doesn't play, because I think, listen, Baylor barely got out of that game with Texas Tech last week. That would have jammed some things up for them, as Baylor can still sit there if they win this game and say, hey, we're 2-loss. We have a conference championship. Why couldn't we jump ahead of some of these other 2-loss teams that wouldn't have a conference championship on their resume? The Oklahomas, the Alabamas potentially of the world, right? Like, why would Notre Dame, for example, get in ahead of Baylor if this happened to be the case? Now, again, we're just begging for different teams to just win, so we don't have this sort of, I don't want to call them like, lower level teams here, but like teams that were never considered college football playoff contenders here that just might find themselves in this sort of situation. So yes, let's hope that Oklahoma State can win. Let's hope that they can cover here so that we can start the day off nicely on Saturday. Again, who knows how Friday night's necessarily going to go. Kent State and Northern Illinois. This is one a lot like Western Kentucky and UTSA, where the number has shifted. If you had asked me like last Sunday, who do I like in this game? I would have said Kent State, because the line was pick'em -1. We are to the point where it is 3.5 now. And at 3.5, I like Northern Illinois more than I liked Kent State at -1. So give me Northern Illinois, Rocky Lombardi +3.5. Northern Illinois always somehow finds a way. They win in the corners, right? They win in the dark places. They win on special teams. They win on defense and turnovers and these sorts of just things, right? Converting 4th downs, all of these sorts of things. Whereas like Kent State can be scary because they run at a quick pace. They score a ton, but they are not very good in special teams, certainly defensively. And when we come to a championship game, give me the better defense. +3.5 points. I will take them in the MAC championship game. As for the Mountain West, San Diego State does those same things that Northern Illinois does. But for me, this is about Utah State getting to this championship, and like kudos to them for doing it. But all you need to do is look up and down their schedule. And there's a handful of really good teams in the Mountain West, the Boise States of the world, the Fresno States of the world, and of course, San Diego State. Shell, guess how many of those teams, those upper echelon Mountain West teams, were on Utah State's schedule this season?
I'm going to guess 2.
Zero of those teams. They somehow managed to have a schedule.
I knew where you were going. I was just being a good teammate. I knew.
You're a good person. You go and you look through and you're like, okay, well, who's their best win? And it's like there's a lot of Colorado States and Air Forces and Hawaii's in there, and you're like, where's the good stuff here, right? And listen, I've backed Utah State this season a couple of different spots because I like the Arkansas State guys that they brought in, right? The coach in Anderson and the quarterback in Bonner. But San Diego State, I think, is just a next level opponent, right? That Utah State hasn't played. Now, San Diego State is playing quote unquote at home, but this is the at home that the Chargers were playing in, right? In Carson, California, in the soccer stadium, where it's not really a home game, but they go and they get that win there last week against Boise after being down early to Boise. That was a really impressive comeback win for them to just put the pedal to the metal there and, quote unquote, save their season. I think they're able to come back here and they're able to put together a pretty good game against a Utah State team that is frisky, but just hasn't played the teams that San Diego State has played. San Diego State's got a win against Utah this season, who are playing in the Pac-12 championship game. This is a team that is battle tested. The 11-1 San Diego State Aztecs, anything under 6 is good enough for me as well, right? 6 being that sort of key number in football in general. As for the Sun Belt game, this is a very sketchy game, right? This is a very sketchy line because
I'm interested.
We have talked about App State and being down on them. We don't think much of Chase Bryce. We cashed as easily as human beings could cash earlier on this season on a weekday game, a Tuesday, I believe, night game. Maybe it was a Wednesday night game, but it was in the Tuesday pod that week. We talked about Louisiana at home against App State. Gimme Louisiana. They win by 1 billion points. And here we are a few weeks later, and this game is in Louisiana because of that win. That gave them home field advantage for this championship game. And now App State is back, and they are favored by 3 in this game. And you and I always talk about, like, don't overreact to one game and blah, 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 blah. But, like, that was a thorough beatdown that Louisiana put on App State here. And so I'll be the lemming. I'll be the guy to just walk right over the cliff here, backing Louisiana plus the 3 against App State at home in the championship game with Billy Napier on his way to Florida. He's not quite on his way just yet. He is going to coach in this game. I just don't understand this line, and that's usually problematic for me because I normally understand all of the confusing lines and why they exist. So I have to take Louisiana because I would otherwise kick myself if I didn't. But this isn't any sort of massive bet for me. This is more sort of obligation than anything else. Next one, the biggie. As crazy as it is to say, right? The American Conference has arguably the biggest game, even though that's not technically true because we'll get to the SEC championship. But Cincinnati, right? Like the story of the season from before the season, right? Like, not that this was rocket science by any means, but you and I have been talking this since before the season. The Cincinnati undefeated trek, the possibility of them doing so. A couple of resume games. Indiana didn't necessarily turn into a resume game. Notre Dame certainly did, as Notre Dame has not lost a game otherwise this season, which is incredibly helpful for Cincinnati.
Yeah.
That being said, 10.5 points here with a really good Houston Cougars team. This is a team that lost their first game of the season against Texas Tech in one of those weird, like, it's in a dome in Houston and both teams are going back and forth, and they end up losing that game to Texas Tech. And they've won every single game since. Now, they've had the same schedule that the Bearcats have had, right? Like, they have played SMU, they have played the dregs of the American, and they have come out on top in every situation. And Houston is branded as this offensive team, right? And always kind of has, like, the quarterback, the Case Keenums of the world, just racking up college stats and getting themselves pro opportunities. This team this year is more about defense. This is a top 10 run defense for Houston. And not that Cincinnati, and listen, Cincinnati can do it both ways. They can run and they can throw, but they are built on defense too. But they are branded as a defensive team because they have a couple of corners that are going to be in the NFL and a couple of pro players otherwise in their front seven. But, like, Houston can match up with Cincinnati offensively. And so this, I think, ends up being kind of a lower scoring game. Now, you never know. There might be some turnovers, some special team scores. I'm loath to bet a total. I just look at this and go, Cincinnati just needs to win. They know that. There's a pressure element here. They are at home, which a lot of times is good. I don't know if that's that good in a conference championship game. You see in the Sun Belt, you see in Conference USA, these home teams where the line is shifting away from them because maybe it's not as important as one would necessarily think. So 10.5 points here with the Cougars in a game that I think is going to be really tight. Dana Holgerson, there's nothing to play for here other than a championship and to ruin Cincinnati's season. I say other than a championship as if that's not that big of a deal. But like, this is just one where like Dana, like he doesn't give a bleep. This is a guy who's just going to show up and is like, you know what? We're going to run some tricks. We're going to run some fakes. We're going to do some wild ass stuff out here. Right. And like, that can be dangerous, right? Like that's the team that's going to be dangerous. Whereas Cincinnati and Desmond Ridder could be a little tight here. Houston might get the first score. And then sort of how does that sort of, palpitate throughout the crowd and that sort of thing. Right. So I like Houston here plus the 10.5. I hope Cincinnati wins. I just think it's better if they do, but I wouldn't be shocked if they lost this game because this is a tough ask. Certainly covering the 10.5 is a tough ask. Speaking of tough asks, I'm going to skip the game of the day here to the end. The night games, tough ask. Wake Forest and Pitt, our guy, Kenny Pickett. How did we spell that out, right? When we bet him at 40 or 50 to 1 to win the Heisman. We're like, he's going to get a chance on Saturday night of conference title day, conference championship day. He's going to get a chance to ball out. And we have talked about this before. I'm going to say it again. I don't know where it happened, where we decided that the Heisman Trophy can only be awarded to a quarterback on a team loaded with NFL talent, whether it's offensive line, wide receivers, running backs. But apparently that's the case because CJ Stroud was the favorite until things went awry against Michigan. And his stats look pretty good. But if you watch that game, his wide receivers were making plays out there. Why? Because all of those guys are really, really good and are going to be NFL good wide receivers. Bryce Young. This is infuriating to me. He plays poorly. The Alabama offense does nothing for 58 minutes against Auburn. And if Tank Bigsby doesn't go out of bounds, if he stays in bounds, Alabama does not get that comeback opportunity in a meaningful way. They don't get the one drive where Bryce Young looked good, the Heisman drive. If it's a Heisman drive in a game that's 35 to 28, fine, absolutely. But it can't be a Heisman drive in a game that's 13 to 6, 10 to 3, whatever that score was at that time. Obviously it went to overtime and they ended up doing the whole overtime victory type thing. But like that can't be the Heisman drive when most of your season is based on just throwing balls short to wide receivers and running backs and have them out talent dudes. All of that is to bring back around to our guy, Kenny Pickett, who has better numbers than both of those guys. And maybe there's a wide receiver that's going to get some time in the NFL on that team. Maybe there's an offensive lineman that's going to get some time on that NFL team, but that roster is not loaded. It is not loaded. And the defense is horrible. And it cost them a game against Western Michigan that seemed innocuous at the time. And it cost them a game against Miami that was way less innocuous or more innocuous. I don't think that's a word at the time. But imagine they're undefeated. And all it would have taken was home wins against Western Michigan and Miami. Imagine if they were undefeated in this ACC title game. Kenny Pickett would be getting more consideration for the Heisman. They would be in position to make the playoff this year. And you're saying to yourself, yeah, well, they should have won those games. And maybe Kenny Pickett should have done more. Well, he had 38 points in one of those games and 40 plus points in the other game. And so we're penalizing him for having a bad defense and for that team to not be undefeated. They're 10-2. They could be ACC champions and all the ACC's down and Clemson's not very good this year. And Florida, it's the AC bleeping C here. Like this is still a league, right? Where if you win the conference championship, like that means something, especially if you're hanging 45 to 50 total touchdowns on teams this season. And so I'm going to play the Panthers here at -3, even though I don't love that I'm giving 3 points to a Wake Forest team that can score, because I want to watch this game. I want Kenny Pickett to throw 5-6 touchdowns while the other guys are either not playing or getting bottled up by Georgia. And I want people to look me in the eye and tell me that Bryce Young is the Heisman Trophy winner, and that, or CJ Stroud is the Heisman Trophy winner, and that somebody other than Kenny Pickett or Kenneth Walker is the Heisman Trophy winner. Because if that's the case, that's BS, and I don't care for it at all. So let's go Panthers. This is an absolutely emotional bet here at -3, and I hope he gets up in that and shows them what's up. Now, as emotionally and fun as that game is going to be, also at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the reason that we can watch Kenny Pickett closely in that game, who, by the way, is the #1 ranked quarterback prospect for the NFL. Like, this is a guy that you should have your eye on, even if you don't care about college football. Maybe your team stinks and they need a quarterback. This is your guy. Meanwhile, Iowa and Michigan. And we all love a good upset, right? Like, oh, look at like the chaos. Michigan beats Ohio State. Like, isn't that great? Like, oh, Minnesota like wins a home game to destroy Wisconsin's chances of winning the conference championship. And then, like in the NCAA tournament, when an upset happens, you then open up the bracket and you see that in the Elite Eight or the Sweet 16, Iowa is involved, right? Like Iowa, Michigan is the matchup. And you just go like, was it all worth it to not have Ohio State, Wisconsin, which I think would have been a really good game, and a game that, listen, if Michigan can beat Ohio State, Wisconsin could have beaten Ohio State, and we could have just dragged out that upset concept a week later, that drama concept a week later. But no, instead we get Iowa on their second quarterback, and like, I don't think this guy's very good. And the problem here for Iowa is the stuff that they do well: defense, special teams, creating the dark places, right? Creating offense from the dark places. Michigan does too. Michigan does it, and they do it better right now, right? Like, this isn't Iowa's best defense of the last decade. This isn't like, how can you possibly score on Iowa? I think Michigan can score on Iowa. So you're looking at this line, and you're going 10.5. Like, Iowa games, they're always, low scoring. Michigan games, they are often sort of sticky and can kind of, revert closer to pick 'em, if you will, right? Closer to a tie. I think Michigan hammers Iowa. I think they take the motivation and everything that happened last week. And I don't think it's a come down situation, because I don't think that Iowa can take advantage of the come down that Michigan might actually have, right? I think it's going to be a challenge for Michigan to get up, but I think that's one that they can meet in this game because they have everything. It's not just like, oh, you're going to win the conference championship, but then you're going to go to the Citrus Bowl. This is, you're winning this conference championship and you are going to the playoff potentially as a 2 seed or even just a 3 seed, because the 2-3 thing doesn't really matter. It's just avoid Georgia at all costs. And so for me, I think this is Michigan. Like, this is very easy to bet Iowa and be like, we're getting 10.5 points. This is great. But then when the game is 14-3 and you're not really sure how Iowa's ever going to score again, and it's the second quarter, and you're literally just like hanging on and hope they get into field goal range or that they create a standard Iowa turnover. Like, they should have lost to Nebraska last week. Right. And I know that the common refrain, listen, Michigan could have lost to Nebraska early on this season. So that's not sort of the be all end all here. But like, the Iowa hasn't discernibly improved over the season. Michigan has. I think this is a special Michigan team. I think they win the game really. And in this case, I will lay 10.5 points. I'll wait around and hope it goes down to 10. That would be great. And give the 10 there. And then finally, biggest game of the day, 4:00, Alabama and Georgia. And this, we talked about this. We've been talking about this game for months, right? At first it was, I can't wait to bet Georgia on the money line when these two undefeated teams meet in this game. And then it was like, oh, wait, Alabama can't block anybody. And they are dodging bullets left, right, and center with LSU, Arkansas, and Auburn. And then the number gets opened at 3, and then it moves up to 4. And I jumped in at 4 and even some 5. And now we're up to 6, 6.5. But you've seen some buyback on 6.5, which I think makes a ton of sense because it was never going to get to 7. You were never going to get 7 points with a Nick Saban Alabama team. Like, that was just not a thing, no matter what, that was ever going to happen. Does that mean that Alabama's the right side in this game? I get the idea. That like plus the points, right? Like, that was, we never thought this number was going to be 6.5 or 6. And now it is for the reasons that you and I try to point out all the time, whether it's NFL or college football, right? Like the perception is that Alabama's all of a sudden garbage. But we've been waiting all season for somebody to be able to test Georgia on the outside defensively, deep down the field. Alabama is the team that can do that. Right? That's in theory, right? Like that's why they have all of the talent on the outside that they have, right? And so this game, it's funny how this game mirrors the college football playoff circumstance where everybody's sort of like, well, if Alabama loses close, they could stay in the top 4 because there's just nobody else that we're all that excited about. Certainly not 3 other teams that we'd be willing to jump Alabama and put them in. And it's funny that the line is 6.5. So it's kind of like they're playing to cover in this game. So even if it's a 10-point game late, right? Like they're going to try to desperately to make this a 3-point game so that cosmetically it looks like it's a close game. This is the one game where it actually makes sense for a team to try so hard to cover as an underdog, because anything less than 6 feels like a close game and might be good enough to get them into the playoff. So I'm sitting here with -4 ticket, -5 ticket, and now it's up to 6.5. And I'm sitting here going like, I think I might have to come back here on Alabama, right? And maybe it's just a matter of watching this game live and playing it live. Maybe Georgia gets an early score, that sort of thing. And because I think it's really, really likely that Alabama gets a backdoor cover because of how important it is to cover for them because of what I just mentioned, this might be a better live spot for Alabama in this game than it is before this game starts. So if you can get them 7 before the game, absolutely, I would do that. Otherwise, I'm going to sit on my Georgia ticket right now, hope that they get a little bit of a decent start here, get a lead, and then I will back Alabama to try to keep this thing close. Anything under, anything 7.5, 7 or better live is absolutely, I think, a play here on a team that just needs to kind of stay in touch here to get into the college football playoff where they can garner themselves a rematch against Georgia, whether that's in the semifinal or the final. Like they are good enough to do that. As much as we sort of harp on Bryce Young, like that's the point, right? Everybody else on the team is good enough. Maybe not the offensive line. Maybe that's why they lose the game, which is, again, what we've been talking about all season long. But we never promised anything about -6s and -6.5 against Nick Saban. That was never on the menu.
I mean, it's just so crazy to think about that, right? The following it the whole year long. And I kind of jumped into college football a little more this year, obviously, than I normally would be in on college football. But it's been funny to see that narrative just with the numbers from the standpoint of Alabama. That's the brand. That's a consistent thing that you see year in, year out. And even if they don't make the playoff, you're still rarely seeing them being 6-point underdogs.
Like literally never. Yeah.
Right.
Right. And if you had told me we dream of well, maybe one day Alabama will be plus money to win a football game, right? It's like, what a great day that would be. And it's like, well, for that to happen, stuff has to happen on the football field. And then it's like, but that stuff happening is going to make you not want Alabama. Like that's the whole point of a market and a point spread, right? Like, but here it is. Here's your shot, like plus, close to 200 on Alabama to win a football game. Like, what a time to be alive. And I'm still not like exclaiming from the rooftops that it has to happen. Yeah. And that's just the weirdness of football and betting and sports and all of that stuff and why it's awesome.
Listen, man, I love your angle on that game, just to wait and see with Alabama and the in-game potential that could be there for sure. But that's why the people come here for this info. And that's why the people want to get more info from you whenever they can. So how do they do that on social media?
Yeah, at MRoss Authentic. Everything I do goes through that account on Twitter. It's my personal Twitter account. We do some celebrating. We do some commiserating from time to time. But we also give out bets that aren't necessarily on the stuff that I write for The Score that I will, of course, retweet. Same thing with this podcast. We try to give out the best bets on Tuesdays and Fridays here. But also, what happens about on a Wednesday in college basketball, right? Well, I handed out 7 games the other day, and it's funny how things work, right? We start 5-0. There's 2 final games, and they're down to the wire. One game loses by the hook. One game loses I would say because Penn State can't, they put 2 centers out there and they still can't get a rebound either way. And you end up going to bed and you're like, oh, we lost those last 2 games. And you're like, well, we had 5-2 today, right? And if we're going to win 5 out of every 7 bets, like on Tuesday, we went 3-2 on podcast stuff. Monday, we went 2-0. And so there's, 5-2 in that group, 5-2 there. If we're just going to sit around and go 10-4 over the course of 14 games, I would absolutely take that. But just the way that it goes down, where the last 2 games lose, and you just go, oh, so close. It's so close to the sweep, so close to 6-1. It's why we always preach never parlay unless you're doing lottery ticket type stuff there with the round robin underdog Monday line parlay. But just play them straight up. We will be profitable over the relatively long term. It's where we were with college football this season, as we talked about, a ton of plays going 53% on the pod, or close to 54% on the pod, and 57 on my score stuff. And then obviously we're going to try to do the same thing with college basketball. Same thing with hockey, right? We can't talk about that we can talk about it on the podcast, but we can't talk about Wednesday games or Thursday games because we don't have lines for them. So I try to get extra plays out there. So whether it's me retweeting my stuff via the score or just Twitter plays, like every Joe out there with Twitter plays, over at @MRussAuthentic is where you can find that. And we have a good time over there.
Appreciate you stopping by as always, my dude. Till next time.
Can't wait, brother.
Thanks to Matt for coming on the pod. And if you want to follow me online, you can do so on Instagram @SheldonAlexander and on Twitter @ShellAlexander. Like and subscribe to the DRF Sports Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And for more on this brand new project for DRF Sports, if you're not familiar with the letters DRF, well, Daily Racing Form has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. But now they're taking over the entire sports world. So if you want coverage on every football game, as well as the NBA, MLB, and more, head to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all of the data on every game, including offensive and defensive stats, betting angles, line movements, key injuries, head-to-head records, and team stats. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. And if you want access to all of the raw data, go to drf.com/sports. That's where you get the usual previews. Plus, we go into the games in depth on this podcast. Basically, however you want your betting information, we've got you covered. That's all I got for now on this, the DRF Sports Podcast. Remember to catch us every Tuesday and Friday. My name is Sheldon Alexander, and until next time, see ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter @DRF_sports.